Hey and good evening, ladies and gentlemen of builders and co-creators. It's another week. It's another Monday. It is good to see you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in to the Builders Baraza. This is the show that we hold here every Monday and Thursday at 8:30 p.m. We always aim to have it last 30 to 40 minutes, but in the recent past, it has extended. It's even gone to an hour, and we are trying to work on that so that we do not keep you for too long. But thank you for tuning in today. We have our guest in the background, and before we welcome him, I wanted to brief you on a few things, some housekeeping before we actually go on to the interview, and I'll be very quick. First is our YouTube channel. A lot of you are not able to be on air with us or to view live when we go on air every week and every segment. So we keep transferring these videos to our YouTube channel. So please go to your YouTube and subscribe. The channel is Builders and Co-Creators, and you will see the kind of screen that you're seeing right now, where you can then click on the segment that you want to watch and you can watch. All right, that is one. The second thing that I wanted to emphasize is that we have been launching these or flighting this show from the group, which is the Builders and Co-Creators. But over time, our licensing will require that we move to the page. So we have a group page. It is called the Builders and Co-Creators. It is a page. Please find it and like it, follow, so that eventually when we are only able to flight this show on the page and not in the group where you currently are, you are still able to follow and you miss not an episode. Thirdly is that we have a sister company. We have a sister movement or a sister group, and it is called Chasing the Title Deed. The reason why we decided to separate building and construction from title deeds, because there was a lot of clutter. We were getting a lot of people who want to sell land, and then there was the building and construction going on. So we decided to separate the two. Now, what is happening is that we're still allowing the land advertisements to come on the page, on the group, but now we are encouraging you more increasingly to post it in the group Chasing the Title Deed, because there it's all about land, it's all about plots, it's all about approvals, it's all about things mchanga. So you want to go there. I think it's better focused.
Yeah, and then that group actually has the right audience on matters concerning land. We have lawyers there, we have people dealing with selling of land, so they actually have more information in that group.
Correct. So really the better group, if you're selling land, is to actually go to the, Chasing the Title Deed. Find it and join now. We will approve you so that you can sell land, or at least shop for land, or at least learn more about land. And finally, before we welcome our guests, is that we have opportunity for sponsorship. Our sponsorship will offer you branding. Our sponsorship will enable you to own the narrative. Our sponsorship will, in fact, enable you to play a TV advert, 30, 35 seconds, even 40 seconds here. And we will flight it many times, and we have a rate card. So if you're interested in sponsoring this, showing us your product, explaining it, and supporting us commercially with this, let us know. We will tell you what you need to do. We will tell you what sort of clips we need so that we can brand you properly. And now, without much further ado, let me welcome our guest today. The guest that we have today, as I had announced earlier, is a landscape architect. Our landscape architect guest today is Hosea Omole. Hosea, you're very welcome. And members, to introduce Hosea, he is the immediate past chair of the Landscape Architecture chapter of the Architectural Association of Kenya. I hope I got that right. The immediate past chair of the Landscape Architecture chapter of the Architectural Association of Kenya. But currently, Hosea is the managing partner at Lancard. You're welcome, Hosea Omole.
Thank you very much, Darlene. Thank you.
Yeah, nice. Please. Thank you, Hosea, for creating time.
Thank you very much. Hi, viewers. And
hi.
The other members in the group.
Nice, Hosea.
Go ahead and introduce. Yeah.
No, already.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Hosea. Let me go. Tell us about Lancard. What do you do at Lancard? What does Lancard do? Introduce your firm, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Salim. Thank you for inviting me to the show. It's my pleasure to be here. Lancard Landscapes is a landscape architectural firm. And besides landscape architecture, we do projects in urban design and environmental management, basically. We incorporated in 2009. We've been doing various businesses in the private sector, public. By the public, I mean for government agencies and government institutions. We worked in Kigali, worked in Sudan, we worked in Somalia. So yeah, a little bit of everywhere, and South Sudan.
So nice, and we will be sharing some of the work that's been done by Lancard as we go along, members, just so that you can see the profile of projects, you can see the creativity of the projects that they do, and the leader of those projects is actually the gentleman that is our guest today. So, Hosea, a lot of confusion. I need you to debunk all this. I need you to explain things to us. Tell us who landscape architects are and what they do.
Thank you very much. I'll take my time here because if I don't, then we run the risk of not proceeding on the same page. Landscape architecture is often misunderstood, and it's not just in Kenya and in Africa. It's misunderstood even in America. People don't fully understand what landscape architects do. But the big issue, the big definition, and I'll attempt to break it down, is that a landscape architect is a professional that is trained to design outdoor places. The ambiguity comes from the fact that when you say outdoor places, you're talking about your compound, but you're also talking about the entire city, and you might also be talking about an entire region, because all that is outdoor places. So where does planning start? Where does landscape end? And where does planning start? So those scales are the ones that sort of confuses people. And that's also the thing that makes landscape architecture very interesting. So it's a landscape architect is a professional that is trained to design outdoor places. To put it closer home, the same way an architect designs rooms in a house, he decides that this is going to be a lounge, this is going to be the bedroom, this is going to be the sitting room, and so on and so forth. A landscape architect looks at the landscape that's available, whatever scale. If it's a residential quarter acre, you look at that and then you decide at this point, people are going to park cars. At this point, people are going to eat. Nowadays, we have outdoor kitchens. So at this point, we're going to have the outdoor kitchen. At this point, people are going to sit. So we have an outdoor lounge. At this point, people are going to gather and do functions. We have a room for functions. So we start by splitting up the outdoors into different rooms, so to speak. Rooms is quote unquote. And
I get it.
So it's the same way the architect designs the interior of a house. The landscape architects will design from that layout. Now, after that, you break it down into, okay, what's the composition of the lounge? How do people use that lounge? How do people enter that lounge? What are the qualities? What is the lighting? What is all that? Of that. So I'm trying to just bring it closer home. I hope I've captured it well, but yeah, very broad, much broader than that, because landscape architects also design public places. So we're talking about parks, we're talking about playgrounds, we're talking about campuses, an entire college campus, for example. How do the different buildings relate with each other? And of course, public spaces. And public spaces also include streetscapes. So all that is within the purview of a landscape architect.
Nice. I think you've done it justice. Yeah. Oh, I'm getting some really bad echo. Sorry. Yeah. So I think, Hosea, you've done it justice in terms of definition, and I think you have separated it really well from, landscape architecture from, what is the other architecture called?
Just called the original architecture. Is actually just called architects. They're called architects.
It's just called, okay.
There's the difference. The difference is the landscape, really, because architects majorly deal with structures, buildings and structures. Landscape architects deal with landscape. So that's the difference is the landscape. I would just put it straight like that.
No, I get it. I get it. So so explain to us, Hosea, because
yes,
Does landscape architecture go beyond landscaping, or is it just landscaping only?
That's a very good question, Salin. This is a really, really good question. It's a question that I try to explain a lot to a lot of my clients, because landscaping depicts beautification. Whenever someone is talking about landscaping, it means they build a house, they put all the concrete. They have not even thought about, they place the house on the compound, probably in the middle. And then when the house is finished, then they start landscaping. The difference between landscape architecture and that is because landscape architecture starts when the architecture starts. So the first thing you have to ask yourself is, how does your house sit in your plot or in your landscape? By sit, you have to think in terms of position, but also in terms of if you have a slope, how does it relate with the slope? Is it higher on, are you going to put it higher than the ground level? Are you going to put it lower than the ground level? Etc. So how does the structure sit on the landscape? That's where a landscape architect enters. And also, how does the landscape integrate with the building? So in landscape architecture, you consider all that. So in terms of function, it's landscape architects think about function rather than beautification. Landscaping sounds like you're trying to just maybe make the place beautiful at the end of when all the decisions have already been made. So a landscaper will be able to do that, but landscape architecture is much more than that. And like I said earlier, landscape architects also work in much bigger projects, public space projects that is beyond the purview of landscaping, so to speak.
I get it. So your scope is not just to finish work that somebody else started. It is actually the scope includes part of the design. So if I'm going to choose the kind of stone that I will use on my wall, if I ever want to have a complete job, it's at that time that I need to engage the services or the attention of a landscape architect so that he can see how that stone is going to really integrate well with the vegetation around there and with the topography around there. That's what you're saying, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And but it goes beyond the other thing. Maybe I would want to add on that point is when you're dealing with a landscape architectural project, you're also dealing with the issues of drainage, stormwater drainage. You're dealing with issues of levels. You're dealing with so there's a lot of functional elements that go into landscape architecture that also don't go into. When you're talking about landscape architecture, you're also talking about how does the car move from the gate to the parking. So all that is, but that's you can't say that's landscaping, so to speak. I think that's the major difference. Yeah.
Hosea, now from what you have explained, maybe just to ask, at what point would me as a prospective
your sound is low. I'm struggling to hear you, but just go ahead.
Okay, I think maybe let me try. I'm asking, at what point would a prospective homeowner actually know that would the landscape architect come first or the architect come first?
That's a very good question. In Kenya, majority of the time, the architect gets the first call. Majority of the time. That is not the case in other jurisdictions. Nowadays, you need almost the entire design team before you start the project. But normally in Kenya, traditionally, people go to the architect first rather than a landscape architect. If you're to be doing a project that is majorly a landscape job, then you'll probably come to a landscape architect first. By a major landscape job, I mean, for example, if you're doing a golf park, so to speak, a golf park, it has structures. So who do you go to first? Of course, the major element there is the golf course. So you'd come to a landscape architect first, and then we'll probably together look for an architect to do the buildings and all. So it really depends on the major component of the project that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wangi, any other question?
However, I still insist that if you're to fully utilize the services of a landscape architect, then you should bring him at the design stage, not necessarily before the architect, but before the designs are closed. It will a landscape architect would add a lot of value there.
Agreed. Okay,
Yeah.
so Hosea,
Yes.
perhaps you have already touched on it, but you can explain a little more. Are there particular types of projects or sort of projects or nature of projects that would usually demand the attention of a landscape architect? You see, rather, please tell members, do not go ahead with 1, 2, 3, 4 type of project without consulting a landscape architect. Do not.
Number one, if you have a compound that integrates outdoor living, that integrates a swimming pool, that integrates, basically, if you have a project that is maybe more than a half of an acre and it incorporates all those elements that I've mentioned, do not go ahead without a landscape architect. If you have a big project, you're talking about a golf course, do not go ahead without a landscape architect. If you have a streetscaping project, it means maybe you have a mall and you want to drive to create a theme that goes from the gate all the way into your mall. Do not go without a landscape architect. Lastly, and I'm talking about projects that are near to us, a hotel project that integrates a lot of outdoor areas would definitely require the services of a landscape architect very early on, because me and you will agree that every time you go to a hotel, majority of people don't want to stay inside. They want to stay outside and enjoy the outdoors. So if you get into a project like that, let's say you want to create a Serena, and you start it without a landscape architect, then you lose out quite a bit.
Got it.
Lastly, but not least, if you have a fragile compound, by fragile I mean either a fragile space, fragile, ecologically fragile, or very steep slopes, very, very steep, difficult slopes, and you have to fully utilize them, I would really encourage you to use the services of a landscape architect.
Okay, however, what is a fragile
ecosystem? Maybe a bit technical. For example, you're in the Mara, and you're next to a wetland in the Mara, where animals come to drink water and all that. You know, there are certain plants, there are certain interventions which, if someone puts on such projects, then it eventually that wetland might not even exist if you don't go about it the right way. So that's a fragile ecosystem. It means the balance is very delicate. If you kill a certain species of, say, even insects, all of a sudden you don't have the birds that are bringing the visitors to your hotel. So that's a fragile ecosystem where, of course, the services of a landscape architect are very, it's an ecologically sensitive space. Yeah.
I get it. Mangi, I'm getting a lot of echo. I'm a bit disturbed. Is there a way you can help me, sir? Yeah, so I'll carry on. So I get it. I get it. If it's ecologically, you know, if the ecosystem is delicate, or, you know, a certain intervention of architecture is likely to destroy the food chain or the relationships within that environment, then obviously you need a landscape architect. If you're going to have a lot of living space on the outside, or if your design is such that there's going to be a lot of time spent outside barbecuing, or if you value views, or your property is at a place where you can take advantage of a view, do not, you know, move ahead in the design before you consult, you know, a landscape architect. So Hosea, think about, you know, a quote or a project that you're about to do. Tell us some of the factors that you consider when you prepare site plans, you know, specifications and cost estimates of land development. What are some of the things that you consider before you actually say this is going to cost you 10 million?
A good question, and I'll also take my time there, so that
not too much
clarity.
Because otherwise we'll keep you here for 2 hours. Not too long. Yeah.
Okay. The first thing is what normally we call the client's brief. So the client's brief is what the client wants at the end of the day, and it's not just what he wants, It's what his family looks like. It's what his preferences look like. It's what he likes to do, so to speak. So normally, let me say, typically, this is what I would do. I would go during a brief can just be a meeting. So you go, you meet the client, they tell you, I want a good garden. I want a garden where I can go and read over the weekend. I want a garden where my kids can play. I want a garden. So all that time, I'm recording the users of the garden that I want to create. So that is the number one factor. I think normally also the most important. What does the client want? Because you don't want to give the client something that they don't want. But then it's also my duty many times to also advise them not to, let me adjust that, not to overthink certain things in terms of, if, for example, a client tells me he wants a loan that is so huge, sometimes I ask, okay, why do you need all these loans? Then if they explain to you that once in a while we have big functions, then maybe you can provide. So I always tell my clients, cut your quotes according to your size. Don't get a landscape that looks like someone else's, but it might not necessarily work for you. So that's number one. Number two is the site itself. So the site itself, there's the microclimates in the site. So sometimes you get a site that is dry. Sometimes you find a site that has a lot of shade. Sometimes there's already a lot of trees on the site. So all those things and we don't want to go and cut trees. So all those will definitely determine how you do your design. The other things is things like orientation. You have an adjacent apartment that are looking into your compound that you want to block away. You have a busy road that you want to block all the noises when the cars are passing and all that. So that's the site itself is a very important factor. So we do comprehensive site studies to just get cues. On public projects, a lot of times there's a culture. The way I will design a project in my village is very different from the way I will design a project in the middle of Nairobi because of cultural issues. If I use certain materials in Nairobi, they'll be vandalized, it will not augur well with the local cultures. For example, if I do a project in Kibera, the kind of materials, the kind of things that I will specify there will probably be I will not put a lot of steel, because I know over time people will try to, pilfer the steel and and resell them. So all those are important elements. So that's a cultural element. And last but not least is aesthetics. What aesthetic standards does my client want? So do you want imported, for example, furniture from wherever, from Turkey? So all those things, do you want certain materials that are not available locally? So that will be a very important factor in terms of how I cost and how I design at the end of the day.
I get it.
I don't know whether I have, those are the factors that I think off the top of my head, yeah, those are important.
Yeah, maybe one more maybe I would want to ask. Maybe
yes,
we have invited an architect here before, and one of the things,
yes,
one of the factors that he considered while designing is actually the zoning of an area. Does zoning affect also landscape architecture when you are designing?
No, not at the moment, not in our context. I'm aware in other jurisdictions it could, but because Nairobi city itself does not have what you call landscape ordinances, it's not, the zoning does not necessarily affect the landscape. However, I know there are certain neighborhoods, for example, in Karen, there are certain places in Karen where you can't cut a tree without the residents, the association agreeing, the residents association agreeing, because they have their own internal mechanisms for preserving their trees and all that. So you can't just go and start clearing. You have to ask for permission before you're given the go-ahead. There are also certain neighborhoods where your fence cannot be higher than a certain height. So those are ordinances which have already been created by residents associations rather than the city itself. But I know in certain jurisdictions, for example, in Singapore, they have places where they need you to, if you clear 100 square meters of green space to put up a building, then you are required to cover that building with at least 100 square meter of vegetation. What that means basically is either you'll have a roof garden or you'll have green walls. That's why when you go to Singapore, you see almost all buildings have green walls, have a roof garden to try and recover the space that the building is sitting on. So you can't just remove,
that makes sense.
You can't just remove vegetation, put a building, and then you lose the space. You have to cover the building with the same amount of square meters as you have cleared. So here the zoning doesn't affect, but maybe it's coming one day when we become more sophisticated or more conscious about these green principles. Maybe we will put those things in place.
Indeed. Shall we carry on? So you talk about climate change, Hosea, or climatic change management. Is there a scope there? Is there scope for landscape architecture in climate change?
Climate change is big, and there are so many factors that I don't think
even talk about the microclimate. Tell us about how it affects the microclimate.
Yes. I'll go straight there. Landscape architects work with nature. We're always working with trees. We're working with the land. You're clearing. You're planting new things. So just by the fact that you're adding greenery into first not even adding, you're protecting greenery. For example, now we're talking about riparian areas. By the fact that maybe there are certain rules against encroaching into those green spaces, already you're preserving certain green. You know that trees are carbon sinks. So the more trees you have in an environment, the more carbon you're taking from the air. So it means you're really reducing the effects of climate change. Not reducing the effects, you're reducing the impact of climate change. The second is the impact of climate change by planting more trees. The other way that we reduce the impact of climate change is issues of what you call resilience. Nowadays, people don't talk about sustainability. People are talking about building resilient places. Basically, that means that in future, because of climate change, there's going to be more events of flooding, and we are already seeing that even in Nairobi. We're going to have a lot of incidences of extreme droughts. So what landscape architects do, not just in this jurisdiction, is design landscapes that can withstand flooding, because inevitably in future there's going to be more flooding. So the interventions in landscape can really help through what you call green infrastructure, through having landscapes that soak in more water, that don't flush water into the streets, that store more water, more and all that. That way, landscape architects are able to reduce the effect. There are droughts, growing more drought-resilient trees and vegetation. Of course, that also reduces the adverse impacts of climate change. But the big one is really adding to the greenery that we lose because of urbanization. And there are so many ways of doing that. Green roofs, green walls. There's so many ways that we can do that. Increasing our forest, repairing the mouth. Yes.
Okay. Now, in that very, on that very note, I know I've already asked you about climate change, but there are problems that are experienced in Kenyan cities. Like traffic congestion. I'm thinking pollution. Issues with infrastructure or lack of adequate, open spaces. Things like land grabbing. Do you think there's any way that landscape architecture could help control that? Or is there scope in there for, such things that are affecting Kenyan cities?
I'll go back a little bit on that. That's a very good question, and that really embraces the full scope of landscape architecture. Landscape architecture started at a time when America was going through industrialization.
Jose, don't tell the whole story.
I'm not going to tell the whole story. So they had a lot of social issues. There was a lot of strife. There was a lot of crime. There was a lot of environmental degradation. Basically, what you see in Nairobi, a lot of pollution, both in the water, in the air, and all that, a lot of dust and all that. So that's the period when landscape architecture started. And it was supposed to resolve those very issues. And the reason I feel our built environment, and by our built environment, I mean our cities and all that, experience a lot of these problems, is because there's this space that is not designed. So you design a building up to your wall, then there's space between your boundary wall and the road. And that space, people walk there. If you're not lucky, you'll have people walking there. If you're even more unlucky, you'll have a lot of fiber optic lines going through there. You'll have services, electric poles and all that. So we call it the contested space. So that space between that, and then you have the road for the car, which is also designed. So this space, at some point, it becomes wider, it becomes a park. At some point, it becomes a road, it's a roadside, it's the side of a road. So that space is never designed. No one designs it. And that's why we have a lot of chaos. If you go to Rongai today, you have the road, which is congested. Then you have all these informal traders up to the building line. And that space where they're sitting and they're selling their things is not designed. What if that space can be designed for those functions? Then all of a sudden you have an organized space where you can solve there's a drainage, there are bridges where people come from the road, and so you have adequate space for border riders to park their motorbikes and wait for people. You have adequate space for people to walk, and dignified space for people to walk. So that's really, really the space of a landscape architect.
Because I'm thinking if these contested spaces are designed for a particular purpose, you know, or somebody who wants to grab them realizes that look, somebody's actually looking after that space, then chances that they're going to grab it without being noticed is almost nil, because a big motivation to land grabbers is there's land lying fallow there, nobody's looking after it.
Exactly.
You know, So I think that I agree with you. A very good example is our Nairobi River Basin, what they are calling riparian land sometime back. It was a catchword. So these riparian lands they don't belong to anyone. So what the government had been doing is neglecting it. So no one is using it, it's not being used. So it's not useful to anyone. So if your land is adjacent to the river, instead of taking advantage of the river, you have to build a very big wall between the river and your property. You move the river.
Or you move it. So the best way of utilizing those riparian areas is to treat them as parks. What if you could leave your office and then you go along the river and there's a jogging track along the river? There's a place you can go and, do a bit of fishing. What if there was a place where if you have your kid's birthday next to the river, you can take it next to the river and you put your, but these are things which have not happened. So landscape architecture, that place has not been designed. So if it was designed for certain functions and to make it beautiful and functional, then all of a sudden, the fortunes of Nairobi River would not be where they are right now.
Now, let me move this on with speed, and the echo is still on me, Mwangi. So, Hosea, tell us about the approvals. If I have a project that requires landscape architecture, do I need any approvals?
Yes and no. If you have, how do I start? If you have your own compound and you're doing your house, if you involve a landscape architect from the design, then whatever interventions we have there will be part of the designs that you take to the county for approval. So if you have a gazebo structure within your compound, it will already be approved at the county. So at that level, you don't necessarily need separate approval for landscape architectural work. However, if the project has a lot of structures and it's only, for example, you have your house already and you want to add a permanent gazebo, then of course you need an approval. You just take it to the county, they look at it, it's an additional structure, they view it as an extension of your compound, so they'll approve it most likely, but they need to know what's happening. Especially if it's a permanent structure. Then projects that touch on riparian lands, road reserves, any project that touches on, say, a forest, all those things will definitely need approvals from the different agencies. For example, roads, you'll need Kura or Kenha. If it's touching on a riparian area, you'll need Warma approval. And maybe, yeah, I think Warma for the case of this and all that.
NEMA.
Yeah. And NEMA, if you're touching on a forest, you definitely need the NEMA approval, probably even Kenya Forest Service. So it really depends on the scope of the work that you're talking about. There's so many landscape projects that we do. For example, in some of the projects that we looked at earlier, someone was doing a terrace. It was a huge office terrace somewhere on 7th floor of a building, and it has a lot of we were putting in a lot of permanent planters. So it was almost a modification project where you're altering the structure of the building itself. So obviously that one you'll need approval, but the extent of that approval usually just involves getting a letter from the city council because it's modifying the building. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yes. Now, Hosea, the question that a lot of people ask and the confusion that a lot of people experience is why do I need a landscape architect rather than an experienced gardener? Please, can you help us distinguish between the two? Because I know when we last had an architect here, we had the same, challenge, not challenge, but we needed him to help us understand why an architect is different from a draftsman, for instance. Yeah. So now back to you. Why do I want to spend money hiring the services of a qualified landscape architect as yourself and not an experienced gardener?
Okay. By definition, a landscape architect is a designer. A gardener is not necessarily a designer. Is to a large extent someone who maintains an already installed garden, an already installed garden. So if, for example, what a lot of Kenyans do, they become the landscape architects themselves. Then you get a gardener and you tell them, I need you to plant this tree here, plant these flowers here, plant this. So that's what a gardener, plant alone here. A gardener could be able to do that. You instruct them and they do it. A landscape architect, like I said from the beginning, looks at your compound as a space for function. So I know that this space you need to park a car there. I know that space needs to one day hold a tent for your children's birthdays or your daughter's wedding party or something. I know that compound one day you'll host a barbecue next to the patio. So I try to look at that space and then I create those outdoor rooms. The next level is now to try and separate them. And the walls on the outdoor rooms, normally you can use the changes in level. You can use plants to create those different walls to separate those different spaces. You can use other outdoor screens. You can use even walls to create those different rooms outdoor. So a landscape architect thinks of that space like that. A gardener, on the other hand, will most likely think of it as, okay, I have 10 plants here. Where do I plant them? So you'll show him, okay, that one plant next to the gate. It looks very beautiful. It has blue flowers. Me, before I get there, I will sit down. We will draw it together. We will cost it together. So you know the project that you're getting into before you get into it. If you're using a gardener, you don't have that power because you can decide what you want 1,000 plants. Okay, first, which plants are these? Are they the best for that site? You already bought them, yeah, but you haven't analyzed all that. So I think that's the major difference is a gardener is someone who maintains. Some of them are especially the new ones, the experienced ones, are very good at maintaining, because a landscape is a living thing. It will not be the same tomorrow as at the point of installation. So how do you nurture it from the point of installation 5 years in to make for the plants to thrive, for it to not overgrow, for it to not undergrow, and all that, so that the original intentions are preserved.
No, I understand. And especially, I mean, to add on to that, when you need to build a feature, you can have really nice flat land, but once you build a house, it's too flat. I think I myself have, I have that challenge, that the lawn is nice, but it's just flat. It's all green. I may want a feature here. I may want to, to segment it in such a way that, one is facing one direction and, so such things are not things that a gardener will do, but a gardener will help maintain it once it is built, once it's conceptualized and, and agreed upon. In fact, once you develop the concept, and I've seen some of the jobs that Hosea does, he actually has this software that will show you how the thing will look in 3D. You can change it as you go along, so that you can say there, I want less green, or here, stuff like that. So that, and then once you agree, he gives you the cost, so that where, if you can afford it upfront or not. Some sort of bill of quantities. I would equate it
exactly,
to that.
Exactly. So you're able to cost plan.
So you can also, with that software, members, it can also tell you what you can do in stages or what you can do in phases, because assuming it's cost $500,000, you don't necessarily have to do it, go full throttle. You can actually say phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, so that by the time it matures, it's one whole concept, tied together, and nobody can actually tell that it was done in phases. But because money is scarce, time is limited, you can actually do it. So he has this software. So if you have land somewhere where you plan to build, a resort or a home, or, it's a bit, people come from the Kisii region, you have land, but it's like you actually build, houses on the, against a hill or against a really steep slope. You can't do that without checking with a landscape architect, and it doesn't have to be Hosea, but please find somebody who is, a landscape architect, because then they will even tell you issues about erosion, the quality of the soil, and how, over time it's going to be, what plants will survive there, what will help conserve your soil, stuff like that. You actually badly need it. Everybody needs it. So, Hosea, maybe we go ahead and you just explain to us, for me or for my son or daughter to be a landscape architect, what subjects do they need to pass?
Yeah, I'm assuming this is from high school. Okay, landscape architecture has a bit of design. So landscape architecture is a science, but it's also an art. So you need a bit of art. So if I don't know whether they still have art and crafts. So if there's that, there's also design. I think drawing and design. If either, you don't have to do both, but either. So that's the art aspect. I think there's a lot of geography, especially things to do with soils. And there's a lot of geography, I think. So that one, I don't know. I think geography could be mandatory in high school. You need a bit of math as well, because there's a lot of geometry, especially because when you're a designer, you have to be able to do a bit of geometry. So that's math. Last but not least, you have to now have a lot of plant knowledge. So I don't know, that should be biology, botany. A good knowledge of plants is important, so that you're able to identify plants and use them effectively.
So then it's a nice mix or balance of sciences and arts. The faculties at the university will know what they require, but it's a beautiful, beautiful balance of, arts and the sciences, because to do botany or to understand that, you must pass sciences, and then there is a geography, and then there's geometry, and then, so Now, Hos, I know that you travel. You're one landscape architect who I know actually takes their money from their pockets, books a plane ticket, and goes to Singapore, for instance, to learn about the new trends in landscape architecture. Would you, not just Singapore, I know that you have visited many places for the sole reason of actually enriching your knowledge, exposure, and style. So tell us, which are some of the, like you call them, the jurisdictions, or which countries or cities, in your experience, have gained a lot from, from landscape architecture?
I don't know. I don't even know how to grade. I won't rank them, but I just mentioned them. I think the landscape school in Singapore is incredible, and given that they are actually our age mates in terms of the time they got their independence, they're also colonized by the British. It amazes me the way they have moved from where they were. If you look at the pictures of Singapore, where it was until what it is right now, in terms of green infrastructure, they are somewhere else. Like I mentioned earlier, I really like the law of if you place a building on 200 square meters of space, you have to plant 200 square meters of greenery, either on top of that building or on the walls of that building or somewhere. Find somewhere to put it. So that has really improved the school. So they are also very passionate about landscapes. You go to Singapore, they have the whole of Singapore is it's a very small space. It's probably the most dense city in the world. The only place that is probably more dense than Singapore as a city is probably Kibera. Kibera is very dense, one of the most dense spots in the world. But Singapore as a city, in terms of density, is very dense. But when
you mean population density structures?
No. Population plus, but I mean the structures per square meter of the total land. Structures per square meter of the total land space. The structures are very tall. They have apartments that go up to 40 floors. But then when you walk through the streets of Singapore, you don't feel those tall structures. You feel you're immersed in greenery because they take it very seriously to have greenery. The other jurisdiction which I think is very good in terms of landscape architecture and our visitors is the US. Landscape architecture started in the US. So obviously they have a very old school in terms of landscape architecture, but they are very good parks. If you go to every neighborhood, they have parks from, if you live in America, you'll likely be able to walk to a park next to where you live. Unlike here, where if you want to go to a park, you have to get onto a matatu or a bus or get into your car to go to Karura. Or if you live in Lavington or Kileleshwa, you have to take your bus and take a bus or take an Uber and go to Arboretum. So they have neighborhood parks. For every neighborhood, they have little neighborhood parks, which are very well designed. And then now they have district parks, and then they have city parks. So that makes the school very nice. The other places which I think are doing very well and come back home is Kigali, Rwanda. Rwanda seems to be doing very much better in terms of landscape. The only issue they have is their spaces might not be very democratic. I feel sometimes that they are very restrictive. They don't want you to step on the lawn, so people don't interact with the spaces as much as they should. But they are very, very beautiful. They are very well maintained. They love their outdoors. They are very proud of their city. And it looks good. I'm sure a lot of us might have seen photos from Kigali, the streetscapes. Yeah.
And that is mainly because it is planned alongside the main buildings, So it's not something that, sasa panda nyasi pale mali mebaki. No, they know that it will be spared when you're building your living area, and that is, they even know from planning phase, what kind of plants are going to be put there. So like Hosea said, members, it is a matter of design from the word go, so that you're choosing the right material, things that will blend with your environment, views that will optimize your, your experience, where you live and where you are building. So Hosea, what's your personal style? What's your personal swag? Hosea?
Gardens.
What's your personal style?
Contemporary. I like contemporary gardens. Contemporary gardens basically are very modern. They're cheap, they're simple, yet very functional, very low maintenance, because they also encourage you to use indigenous plants. You don't import too many plants from other places. So you use the plants that are, if your house is in a grassland or your project is in a grassland, you end up using those same grasses that you find in the wild within your compound. And then they're very simple, they're clean, and very functional. So I would, if I was to ask what my style is, it would be contemporary. But normally I'm flexible, because sometimes I meet clients who want a rustic feel. But nothing wrong with also combining a rustic feel with modern and contemporary.
I get it. So all these styles will determine, what plants you pick. It will determine what kind of hills and valleys you create. It will determine what streams you create, all these things. So, well, I was just asking so that, members can tell, and you say you're contemporary, almost minimalist. You use plants that will optimize, the opportunity to, what do you call it? Things that are low maintenance, So, Hosea, I know I wanted to ask you if landscape architecture is only about aesthetics or if it's functional as well, but you've already answered that maybe you want to give it one last shot. Is it only about aesthetics, or are there functional aspects to it as well? I can't hear you.
There are very many. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
I think, okay, good, thank you. Landscape has a lot to do with function. In fact, for me, function should come before beauty whenever you're designing a landscape. Land is very expensive, not just in Nairobi, everywhere right now. You don't want to have half an acre. You put your building maybe less than a quarter acre. So the rest of it becomes space which you just see. That would be very sad. You like looking at and all that. So that would be very sad. You want to fully utilize your compound. So to fully utilize your compound, you have to look at your compound and say, how can this compound add value to my lifestyle? And lifestyle, that means on a daily basis, when I go to home, what do I like to do? Do I like jogging? Do I like cycling? Do my kids like going camping? So you look at all that, and then you incorporate those as functions within your landscape. The other functions you had already mentioned are things to do with the environmental control. Environmental control basically means if you have flooding or something, you have a compound that is low lying, so it means it could flood. So how can landscape help to mitigate that flooding? If you have a compound that, like you said, there's soil erosion on your compound because it's on a slope, how can you how can you mitigate that with landscaping? Those are functions. The other function I would add is, so there are very many functional aspects anyway in landscaping besides beauty. But I believe if you address the functions properly, beauty becomes very easy to realize, because now that you combine the functions with the art in me, and you get a compound that is both functional and looks beautiful and will last for a long time, and most importantly, suits your lifestyle. That's what people, a lot of people miss that back. They get a compound which does not suit their lifestyle. So you have this compound which you don't utilize. So you're putting a lot of money maintaining it. You have someone has to cut it, to cut the grass. Someone has to sweep it. Someone has to do so much work on a monthly basis, but you're not fully utilizing the space. All it's doing for you is you're just looking at it. It is sometimes it's sad. The other thing which I want to add is, for example, we've been very critical with the Nairobi City Council, because they treat their landscape projects as beautification projects. So for me, that basically means you're utilizing so much money, but you're not creating usable space. You're basically just creating space that looks good with so much money. How about if we could convert some of these spaces? We don't beautify them. We actually design them as spaces where Nairobians can use and are useful for their daily lives. A lot of people like shopping when they leave work. So as you cross from CBD through Uhuru Park, how about if we could have properly installed places where people can buy those outdoor, fruits, something. For me, that's more functional than just having a beautiful space. You can have both beautiful and functional space.
Yeah, thankfully we don't have to choose,
You don't have to choose.
You don't have to choose. You don't, as long as it is functional, it's going to be easy to make, practical and beautiful, and it's going to have a great level of resilience, because the plants that you choose to put in there will definitely, As always, Hosea, this is the point where now, we ask you what you're going to do for our members. There are people out here who will want you to give quotes. So we always, we want a discount. What percentage discount are you giving members who make an order, place an order before December? And while you think about that, maybe Mwangi can ask his question. Sorry, Mwangi.
Okay.
Yes, before Hosea, before we get off, I have now the last question he was answering was about landscapes as a function, serving a function, and I was just going through about the recent upgrade of the Luduli Avenue in Nairobi. So I have some photos here.
You're breaking up.
I have some photos here about on Luduli Avenue, the recent project that was an upgrade. And I wanted actually to just hear about your comment about this project. Was there a landscape architect involved? Does this upgrade actually serve the function? Yeah, so if you look at this image,
show us the pictures.
Luduli Avenue. Yeah, here they are. Before. This is before.
Yes.
And also this is before.
Yes.
And then this is now.
Yes.
This is how it is right now. What is your comment on this project?
Okay, let me start by making a few admissions. In the very initial stages of this project, I was actually consulted, and they said they want to pedestrianize Luduli Avenue. So initially, I was involved. It was a design competition by mostly student groups. So we had very good designs, very interesting. Some of them were not very practical, but interesting. Concepts, so to speak. However, at some point, these people had abandoned all these concepts. I don't know what happened, and decided to just proceed. The good thing about this project is that pedestrianization is a concept that is happening all over the world. All CBDs, all central business districts in the world are trying to remove cars from the CBDs. So this is a very bold step, actually a very good step to try and pedestrianize. So the concept of pedestrianization, and specifically Luduli, it has a lot of shops, electronic shops. It's a place where you want to go and enjoy shopping. However, the execution of this project, in my opinion, was rushed because you don't just go there and start doing cabro and putting
it's just tone.
For me, I feel it's too hard. It's too.
Mangi, why are your pictures dancing?
No, this is a video playing.
Okay.
It doesn't.
This is a time lapse.
Oh, okay. It doesn't present a good, dignified, comfortable environment for shopping. The one that was done a lot better was not Mamangina. The one outside 20th. I feel that was done a little better than the way this one was done. For me, the concept was good. initially, but it looks like it was set aside, and they decided to go with paving and putting bollards, which in a way that, in a very basic way that does not, people are not cars. People don't move like cars.
Actually, looking at it, I'm even tempted to think that I can do it myself. There's no creativity there. It's just cablo. Seriously.
And then that's now, even the art, the element of art is completely missing.
Absolutely.
So, so the element of art is absolutely
something
missing.
else I noticed also is that the drainage there actually doesn't work. The drainage is terrible on that street.
Yeah, so for me, the execution was not done well. The idea of pedestrianizing it is good, is wonderful, it's very progressive. Yeah. However, the way they went about it, the city county went about it, they did not deliver a very successful pedestrian promenade.
Okay, Hosea, back to the part that itches. Help us scratch discount.
I don't know how many people are waiting out there, but if you come within the next 6 months, we can talk, but we'll talk about 15% of the design fee. Not
15.
I do design build. I have 15. 15 is good. I do design build.
20,
so on the build element. 20, it really depends. If the project is big enough, we can do 20. But I'm usually willing to negotiate with my clients. We are on Wood Avenue. You can drop me an email. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter. I'm Hosea Omole on most of those platforms. And you can reach us, Lancard Landscapes, I think with lancard.co.ke. We have a website. A few of our projects are there. And you can contact us through the contacts that are there. We'll be more than glad to do your project. And don't worry, whether your project is small, medium, big, we do projects across all those scales.
Yeah, I actually was going to reiterate that, Jose, that sometimes when people hear about landscape architects, they think, hey, huyo anataka, 2 acres and above. Truth is, you've seen, spaces that Hose Lancard particularly has designed as small as your backyard. They make it fresh, they make it functional, and they make it beautiful as well. So, Hosea, thank you so much for coming by. Thank you for sharing with us this fresh area of the outdoors and landscape architecture. It's an area that confuses a lot. We do not know exactly why we are spending money on it. However, and a lot of clients, myself included, you do not know what value you will get out of, landscape architecture until it is delivered. So you're like, inaonekana pale ule alitumia architect, and this is why we are saying that make use of the software that Lancard has that shows you your finished sort of, product before you actually spend a shilling on it, so that you know if that's what you really want or not. So the, numbers are on the screen. Besides that, there is my number, which is 0705 640 667, and Mwangi's, which is Mwangi.
I'm sharing shortly on the screen. Yeah, I'm sharing shortly on the screen.
Nice. So guys, stay tuned for the next segment next week on Thursday. Hosea will release you now, but before you go, we want to say thank you so much. Members, take advantage of 15%. He says he can even go to 20% of his design fees. The difference is that they are direct costs. He cannot give you the softer finishings of your outdoor space at a discount. He's not manufacturing them. Where he can give you a discount is in his design fees, and that usually is a big percentage. So when you go, don't say, oh, you said it's $1 million, so now give it to me at 850. No, that million perhaps had like 150,000 shillings design fees. That it's upon that 150,000 shillings that then you get a 15% discount. That is what Hosea takes home. So I hope I explained it well. Hosea, thank you for coming. We will be consulting you. Members will be consulting you. And members, if you go to Hosea and he declines to give the discount, tell us. We shall call him out. Yeah. So Hosea, thank you. Have a good night and God bless your business.
Thank you, Salene. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Mwangi. It was a pleasure. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Hosea.
Good evening to you. So members, as we release Hosea, I will reiterate, YouTube We will have all these, we already have all these videos on YouTube. The one you're watching now will be on it tomorrow morning. Remember to like our page, because soon we will be hosting this on the page rather than the group, because that is what our licensing, dictates. Thirdly, please find the group on Facebook called Chasing the Title Deal, so that you learn everything learned. There are lawyers there, there are surveyors there, there are shoppers there, there are sellers there, and you can compare and contrast. And finally, the opportunity for sponsorship, always open. We will brand you, we will play your videos here, we'll introduce your brand and product. You will give us the narrative and we will share it with people, not necessarily just to share it with them, but we will make it interactive so that people can hear what you're saying, the message that you're putting out there, and you'll be able to get feedback. As well, we will be able to brand this studio with your logo and everything else that you want us to do. So without taking more of your time, I think we've gone again beyond 1 hour, and we are trying to manage these members. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for staying to the end. Mwangi, any other thing you want to mention?
No. Thank you guys for following. I see we had some comments. So many people had been following. And
yeah.
I think all the questions also on the thread have been answered by Hosea. So thank you
nice.
for tuning in today.
Thank you for tuning in. Have a good night and God bless you. Keep building.